When the House of Valois-Burgundy was established under Philip the Bold, the youngest son of King John II of France in 1342, none could have predicted the seismic gains the Burgundians were about to enjoy. Preying upon the weak kings and civil instability as the 100 Years' War raged, the subsequent Burgundian dukes, John the Fearless and Philip the Good, were shrewd politicians and successful on the field, with a nearly unblemished record. However, Philip unintentionally laid the groundwork of their destruction in 1456 when he granted refuge to the young Louis XI, the Dauphin of France. King Charles VII ominously warned, "My cousin Burgundy is feeding a fox who will eat up all his chickens." From the Duke's perspective, it seemed like the wise thing to do. Accept the heir to France, host him on your own dime, and then once he took the throne, you would exert considerable influence on him. However, this proved not to be the case, as Louis whispered foul counsels into the aged Duke, effectively masterminding the removal of Nicolas Rolin, the Bismarck to Philip's Wilhelm, replacing him with the Croy family, loyal to Louis. The Croy quickly assumed the most important positions in the state, greatly weakening Burgundy to prepare the way for the eventual French conquest. Louis's most destructive work was the tie between Philip and his heir, the future Charles the Bold.
You dirty pig! Get out! Get out!
Thanks to Louis, Charles was banished to Holland. The final years of Philip's reign only worsened, as Louis XI took the throne and made it immediately clear that the Burgundian goodwill meant nothing, preying on the old Duke. With death quickly approaching, Philip's dream of a crusade once more became the priority. So, he sold the crucial fortified Somme cities in 1463, essentially the importance of the Picardy buffer to the Low Countries, to finance his crusade.
It's free real estate.
Charles was furious and desperately begged his father to reconsider, but the stubborn old Duke was dead set on the crusade, further weakening Burgundy. The crusade never even materialized, proving the futility of the sale, while Charles was determined to recover his lands, defeating Louis in the War of the Public Veil, recovering the Somme cities alongside other concessions that Louis quickly reneged upon. Charles eventually ascended as Duke in 1467, and things appeared to go positively, winning numerous campaigns, appearing to get the best of Louis. But the clever French king, given the epithet the Spider, was not out of the fight. Louis funded every possible opponent to the Burgundian Duke. Too focused on war, Charles put off siring an heir till his realm was secured, not even spending his wedding night with his wife, while Burgundian might reach its pinnacle in 1473, when Emperor Frederick III met with Charles to discuss forming the Burgundian lands into a kingdom, and the deal seemed extremely close, with the coronation mass even being prepared. But alas, at the last minute, the emperor backtracked, though nobody knows exactly why he got cold feet.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Things rapidly deteriorated for Charles, who eventually perished at the hands of the Swiss in 1477. Without a male heir, his sole daughter, Mary, quickly wed Maximilian of Austria, but Louis immediately marched upon Burgundy after the death of Charles, claiming Burgundy proper and Picardy. The remaining lands were folded into the Habsburg Imperium, but the age of the Burgundian was over. But fear not, my 48,000 Burgundian friends, and the 90% of treacherous Frenchmen who have yet to subscribe, as Philip heeded the warning of King Charles VII, refusing refuge to the Dauphin. According to historian Bart van Loo, it is highly doubtful whether Louis could have made it to Reims without Philip, just as Charles VII could not have been crowned without his guardian angel, Joan of Arc. Being sent back to his father, Louis's constant machinations did not go unpunished, as he once again attempted to remove his father from power in another coup.
Fooled me once. Shame on you. It fooled me, we can't get fooled again.
The wily old fox, however, was prepared, executing his son, leaving the feckless Charles of Valois as a new Dauphin. Without Louis meddling in the Burgundian affairs, the loyal Rolin remained at Philip's side, continuing the centralization of the state until his death in 1462. Philip would also pass away in the same year, not recovering from his own illness, but made Charles swear him an oath. Do your chivalric duty, no matter how many battles you win or lands you conquer, it is all for naught without an heir. Swear to me and all the saints in heaven, especially Saint Andrew, the patron saint of our lands, Burgundy, and the Order of the Golden Fleece, that you will sire a son. Charles, realizing that his father would not recover, swore the sacred oath. Assuming the vast Burgundian lands in 1462, Charles still had the important cities of the Somme, providing him much flexibility in his dealings with his French liege lord. The character of Charles was quite complex. As a devout Catholic attending daily mass, viewing himself as the most pious leader of his day, never once cheating on his wife, probably the only lord in all of Europe to do that, but he was also rather bloodthirsty and eager for glory. When he first arrived in Ghent with much fanfare, a mechanical automaton of the Nine Worthies, the medieval personifications of chivalry, Hector of Troy, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Joshua, King David, Judah Maccabee, King Arthur, Charlemagne, and Godfrey of Bouillon, the leader of the First Crusade, beckoned the young Duke, where he was determined to one day add his name to their ranks. Talk about a Napoleon complex. Another thing should be noted. Although his English epithet is the Bold, it is not an accurate translation of the French Le Téméraire, which more accurately translates to the Reckless. His great-grandfather, Philip II, actually received the epithet of the Bold, Philippe le Hardi. However, history knows him as the Bold, so Charles would do everything in his nature to culminate the totality of his forefathers' ambitions. As the mastermind behind the War of the Public Ville, a similar conflict broke out against the weaker King Charles VIII, as many powerful lords wanted to weaken the royal authority and maintain their ancient feudal rights. While somewhat important for Charles, he used this as a pretext to increase Burgundian autonomy, so backed his brother-in-law, John II, Duke of Bourbon, kicking off the war. The League of the Public Ville quickly assembled into a sizable coalition, including the Duchy of Berry, the Duchy of Bourbon, the Duchy of Brittany, the Duchy of Lorraine, the Duchy of Nemours, the County of Armagnac, the County of Saint-Pol, the County of Dunois, and the County of Albret, all receiving support from Burgundy. The League faced off against King Charles and his royal army on July 16, 1465, at the Battle of Montlhéry, a narrow victory for the rebels. Charles of France fled back to Paris, but they soon captured the French capital, forcing the king to sign the humiliating Treaty of Paris. Despite holding France in the palm of his hands, Charles could not force his independence yet, as it would leave a majority of his lands within the Holy Roman Empire, and if he already played his hand at independence, Emperor Frederick III would never acquiesce to his designs. Instead, Charles received the next best thing: total legal autonomy from France, so the Burgundian Supreme Court became the highest court of appeals to anyone within the lands of the Valois Burgundians, effectively recognition of Burgundian, not French, suzerainty in their estates. Burgundy also no longer had to pay tribute to France. Additionally, the lands from the house of the County of Burgundy-Nevers, a cadet branch of Valois Burgundy, were stripped away as John II fought for the king. John, a cousin of Charles the Bold, only recently received his lands after his brother Charles I died without a legitimate heir. This added the County of Nevers, giving Dijon a huge buffer, Berny Isles, the County of Rethel, and the County of Eu, reinforcing Picardy further. Despite Burgundian aims to bridge their two holdings with expansion into Champagne, it was a royal domain, and Reims, the source of legitimacy, was within Champagne, so Burgundy could never receive it in totality. Instead, Charles shored up his defense further, taking the County of Guise, Grandpré, and the lands east of the Marne River, including the cities of Joinville and Langres. Brittany received further autonomy, while his Bourbon ally, John II, was granted the governorship of Languedoc, though it officially remained in royal hands. France was effectively neutralized for the time being, freeing up Charles to focus on the Low Countries. Despite the jubilations, troubling news struck the Duke. His beloved wife, Isabella of Bourbon, died of tuberculosis at the age of 31. His oath to his father came roaring back into his mind. He was now 32 and had no son. What did all this matter if a foreigner reaped the benefits of his toils? His mother, Isabella of Portugal, arranged his marriage with Margaret of York in 1468, the sister of King Edward IV of England, establishing strong Anglo-Burgundian ties. As fourth cousins, their marriage required a papal dispensation, something Pope Sixtus IV was happy to give, as the papacy and Burgundy had extremely strong ties. The two were eventually wed on July 3, 1469, in the most extravagant reception across all of Europe. The new Duchess was 22 springs young, and according to witnesses, she was an attractive woman. The new couple spent their wedding night together, and Charles kept Margaret in his company. The time spent together allowed Charles to get to know his wife, who was an extremely intelligent politician, historically guiding his daughter Mary to wed Maximilian Habsburg and secure the future of their lands within the Holy Roman Empire. Although never especially affectionate, as Charles had been with Isabella, the two had a deep mutual respect for one another, benefiting Burgundy as a powerful complementary tandem. In that time, Charles violently quelled numerous revolts that broke out across the Low Countries. Although Liège was a prince-bishopric under the protection of the Church, he had supported Louis de Bourbon, the brother of his late wife, as the new bishop back in 1456. The citizens, however, were not especially fond of the pro-Burgundian cleric, overthrowing him in 1465 and marching on Charles' territory, only for Charles to reinstate him after crushing them at battle. The cycle repeated twice more as Charles sacked Liège and acquired the entire prince-bishopric as a protectorate in 1468, totally not part of Burgundy.
Right.
Through the excellent diplomacy of Margaret and Charles' mighty armies, Burgundy expanded further. Back in 1469, Upper Alsace, in constant conflict with the emerging Swiss Confederacy, had been sold to Charles by Sigismund of House Habsburg, as the Austrian was in dire financial need. Charles paid the Swiss little attention. He would deal with them later, once he had time to coordinate with his close Savoyard allies. The common pestilence would easily be crushed. How could the Swiss cause him any issues? Without France to worry about, he completed his father's dream, conquering Frisia in 1470. The Duchy of Guelders and the County of Zutphen were acquired from Arnold of Egmont in 1473, once again through papal backing. Duke Arnold had occupied the throne since 1423, but was imprisoned by his restless son Adolf in 1465.
My turn! You told me it was my turn!
This was relatively unheard of in Christendom, causing great scandal, so the Pope appointed Charles to mediate the situation. It's unclear how the Holy Father thought Charles was neutral, but I guess the Holy Spirit convinced him. Adolf was arrested, and the old Duke of Guelders, restored to power in 1471, bequeathed the lands to his savior upon his death, which hence ended up with Burgundy on February 23, 1473. While traveling back from Nijmegen, the main city of Guelders, he stopped in Aix-la-Chapelle to visit the tomb of his distant forefather and namesake, Charlemagne, whose path to greatness the Burgundian was surely following. While in Luxembourg, the former Duke of Lorraine passed away, so Charles opened an alliance with the new 22-year-old Duke René II to oppose France, granting Burgundy free passage through Lorraine and the appointment of Burgundian captains for Lorraine's fortification, transforming Lorraine into a half-Burgundian protectorate. Up ahead, the most important meeting of Charles' life with Emperor Frederick III in Trier would decide the fate of Burgundy. On September 30th, 1473, the Austrian Emperor and the Burgundian Duke, with the wise counsel of his wife, met face to face. Off the rip, Margaret, the tough Englishwoman, put an end to the frivolity, reminding Charles that they were there to strike a deal, not one up the Emperor who held the keys to Burgundian glory.
Get back to fucking work. It's time to get back to work.
Richard Vaughan highlighted the insanity of this in Charles the Bold. They, Charles and Frederick, wrangled over points of honor for an hour, for the Duke refused to sit on the Emperor's right, nor could they subsequently agree about the exact manner of the Duke's departure, for while Frederick insisted on seeing Charles downstairs and out of the building, Charles would not hear of it. He did manage to get as far at the bottom of the stairs on his own, but had to remount them hurriedly when he noticed Frederick following him down. Once negotiations truly began, it quickly became apparent that the German prince-electors were not fond of the flashy Burgundian.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Frederick was also not keen on granting Charles the title, King of the Romans, which was given to the Emperor's designated heir. Despite this being the initial objective for the Burgundian, so his heirs could one day use the full might of the empire to crusade against the Turks, it was off the table. He quickly pivoted to the formation of the Kingdom of Burgundy, as Margaret pushed him to be decisive in his aims. Simple things were acquiesced to by Charles, abandoning his alliance with Frederick I, the victorious Count of Palatinate, a close Burgundian ally who constantly foiled imperial designs in the west. Charles could always renege on this later. His ambitions for the Bohemian crown, to make himself an elector, likewise were dropped. However, the most important change was that he brought his daughter Mary, dispelling any rumors that she was some unhealthy, deformed invalid goblin, placating any fears the Habsburg Emperor had on betrothing his son, Maximilian, to the Burgundian princess. With marriage agreed to, which Frederick hoped would grant his dynasty the rich Low Countries, the 40-year-old Charles was still without a male heir, though his wife was still only 27, the formation of the Kingdom of Burgundy was ready.
And I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
This would not be the Kingdom of Lotharingia. None of the contemporary sources that reported on the new kingdom referred to it as Lotharingia, while almost all of them called it the Kingdom of Burgundy. The new kingdom would be part of the Holy Roman Empire, though imperial control was effectively non-existent in the western lands. Burgundy composed almost the entire west, essentially serving as a shield against France. According to the nobility discussing the new kingdom with Frederick, Cleves, Lorraine, Savoyland north of Lake Geneva, all were within the new kingdom, finally connecting the lands hither and thither. The rest of Savoy would be under the kingdom, protecting it from the Emperor and France, though still de jure within it. Savoy was one of Burgundy's closest allies, so this would be a welcome development in their clashes against France and their Italian rivals. The important bishoprics of Utrecht, Liège, Toul, and Verdun were also to become Burgundian protectorates. It's important to note that the French lands of Burgundy, nearly half of Charles' possessions, were not part of the kingdom, as the emperor had no authority to strip them from France. The relationship was similar to how the initial Angevin kings were both the King of England and Dukes of Anjou and Aquitaine. Workmen soon prepared the Trier Cathedral, and on November 18, 1473, Charles the Bold was crowned King of Burgundy.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
At long last, Charles' name was now surely cemented amongst the Nine Worthies, eternally etched into history, so his immediate focus shifted on an heir. He had duped the old Frederick. His son Maximilian would never rule Burgundian lands. Only a son of a Valois Burgundy could do so. Charles was not impotent, so after a few months, Margaret was pregnant, as all of Burgundy prayed the Lord grant them a prince. Charles immediately returned to military matters, as a massive opportunity presented itself when Prince Bishop Ruprecht of Cologne, brother of his former ally Frederick I of the Palatinate, was dealing with an open rebellion. Although no longer former allies, Charles saw the chance to make his first German expansion, declaring himself the protector of Cologne and the church. Neuss, the stronghold of the rebels, was besieged and captured in August, while the rest of the rebels were put to heel by the end of 1474, adding Cologne to Burgundy, furthering its ties with the church. To mark off the successful year, Margaret gave birth to a son, Prince Louis, a dig at the French, securing Burgundy's dynastic future, a devastating blow for Frederick and the Habsburgs. The old emperor's gamble was all for naught. In the following years, Charles looked for further expansions, but the Swiss proved incredibly difficult. Those country bumpkins actually knew how to fight. Despite his aims to conquer the pesky Confederation, he was unable to do so. He did annex some of their lands with the House of Savoy, providing a stable link to the crucial Italian mercenaries that fought in his armies, but the Swiss spirit was resilient. As Charles aged, he saw further wars against the French, but did not achieve full independence, though some minor gains were secured. With France once more weakened, he honored his agreement with the papacy, though not quite in the way the Holy See desired. While his Hungarian ally occupied Austria and Bohemia, he instead strengthened his alliance with Spain. 12,000 Burgundians aided the Spaniards in completing the Reconquista, destroying the Emirate of Granada. To cap off the successful campaign, Prince Louis was betrothed to Isabella of Aragon, the eldest daughter of the Spanish monarchs.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Without Burgundy, the Habsburgs were just another dynasty, nothing special for the Trastamaras of Spain. The union of Burgundy and Spain was a natural one, as both were extremely devout.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Spain was expelling Jews and Muslims, while Burgundy was the last state to attempt the crusade. The monarchs of both lands were staunch Catholics. Burgundy was heavily swayed by three of the most important orders of all of Catholicism: the Order of Cluny, the Cistercian Order, and the Carthusian Order, all centered within Burgundy, giving them extremely close ties with the papacy, enabling an upper hand over their rivals. On top of their shared religious fervor, Burgundy opened up northern European markets for the riches of the Americas that were flooding into Spain. The only true failure of Charles' reign came in 1486, as the Habsburg bribes secured the imperial throne for Maximilian. When Charles finally passed away in 1502 at the age of 69, he left Burgundy as one of the most secure and powerful states in all of Europe, extremely wealthy, militarized, and independent, and all but named from France and the Holy Roman Empire. 28-year-old Louis had trained for this his entire life, having served since his youth as the Count of Flanders, one of Burgundy's richest possessions. After his marriage to Isabella, her only brother John died in 1497, meaning he was the heir to the entire Spanish Empire, including their burgeoning overseas possessions. Louis and Isabella got along splendidly, having numerous children, as he, like his father, was quite devout in his faith. Religiously, Burgundy further strengthened ties with the church, as the two held France especially in disdain as their kings began making their mistresses, essentially harlots, an official court position.
Disgusting!
Although holding a rigid sense of morality, the Burgundian line skipped over the Bible passages about charity, gaining a reputation as bloodthirsty and cruel for their army's actions on the field. Isabella's mother, Queen Isabella of Castile, died in 1504, making Louis the co-monarch of Castile, so Louis wasted no time renewing wars with France and Switzerland, expanding his realm further. Finally, in 1516, Ferdinand of Aragon died, leaving Burgundy in control of all of Spain.
I'm in danger!
However, just as everything seemed ripe for a Burgundian golden age, an unknown German priest nailed his 95 Theses on the door of All Saints Church in 1517, kicking off the Protestant Reformation. With new Christian sects rapidly spreading throughout Europe, Louis sensed the opportunity to prove his loyalty to the papacy and finally achieve de jure independence from France and the splintering Holy Roman Empire. Would Burgundy prevail amidst the wave of Protestants, or would it collapse from the religious tensions? Let me know in the comments. By the way, to anyone who disagrees with the video, I read 3 books on Burgundy, so shh, I don't want to hear it. Anyways, thanks for sticking around at the end of the video. You can watch another great video here. I'll see you next time. Bye.